So last week I used tinting white, alizarin crimson, Silurian blue, and I used cadmium yellow light. But this week I thought I'd change to cadmium yellow deep. And we'll just see, last week, if you remember when I was painting Nicola, that colour combination I hadn't used before for painting a portrait. And I haven't used this colour combination before for painting a portrait either, because I now changed to cad yellow deep with the Silurian blue and the alizarin crimson. So let's see how that works. So purely looking in terms of tone, the underlying base layer I've got is going to be close to a highlight or a light mid-tone on Clive's face. So I need to mix up some darker colours in order to introduce a sense of form to the head. So with that in mind, what I'm going to do is pick up some of the Silurian blue and we'll grab just a touch of the alizarin. So I've got a bluish purple there. And now that okay, it's gone more to a reddish purple now, so I just need to get a bit more, a little bit more of the blue. And then I need to grab just a little bit of the cad yellow deep, and we'll put that in and see what we get. So that's gone too greenish, but it's actually not too far out. So we'll now grab a little bit more of the alizarin to push it more towards the red. And I think that's probably a reasonable starting place. So the paint's a little sticky today, so I think for whatever reason the Silurian seems to be a little bit thicker out of the tube than the other two primaries I've got there. So just sprayed some water onto the palette, and what I'm going to do now is look at the sitter's face purely in terms of shapes. So if I see a dark shape, I'm going to copy that and put that down onto the painting. So for example, the right hand side of the forehead and the hair is pretty dark. And then as I move to the left of the forehead, things tend to, in general, lighten up. So what I'm going to do is just spray a little bit of water onto the painting, and I'm going to drag that colour over to the left into that damp patch, and that's going to automatically just slightly lighten the colour I put down, because I've got a thinner layer of paint. And then I can use that to begin to introduce a few kind of contour lines on the forehead, most of which will probably be lost, to be honest with you, later on in the painting. And then it's reasonably light here, but I just want to, it's the underlayer is too light, so I'm just going to darken that for now. And in fact, what I might do in a moment is just lift off some of that paint I've just put down. But let's keep going with the amount I've got on the brush for the moment. So again, I'm just squinting at the reference photo, and I'm just trying to think of it as a pattern of shadow and light. Now, a reasonable question here would be, you spent all that time on the drawing, you've just sprayed the painting with water, the lines are starting to bleed a little bit, and you could lose your drawing, and yeah, that is a danger. But if I work reasonably quickly, the lines should be visible for long enough that I'm going to get the benefit of that drawing that I did. And then as I go further on, I would be covering up the drawing with paint anyway. So, there's not too much to lose. So when we squint at the reference, artists often talk about doing this. What you're doing basically by closing down your eyes is, you can't really see any detail. So and not that much colour either. So, for example, if I squint at the eyes, they just look like, the irises just look like dark discs. So although the colour I'm applying here isn't going to be correct, it doesn't hurt to include it, because it is a dark area. So, and then I can obviously correct the colour later. So I can do the same here. there's quite a lot of dark shadow under the lower lip. Obviously in between the teeth. So one of the things I've just spotted but hadn't noticed before is the gap I've got between the upper teeth and the lower teeth is too big compared to the reference. Now I might be able to get away with that because obviously, yeah, he could be holding his mouth open a little wider than I've got it, but for now I'll assume I'm going to correct it, and that will mean I'll need to raise up the lower lip a touch, so I'll just do that with the shadow. So even though I took all that time with the drawing, I still can't assume, you know, I've got it right. I have to keep looking. So you can see already, you know, the colours aren't right, but it's started to introduce a certain amount of form and three-dimensional nature to the surface of the painting. I'm not overly happy with how dark I've made that, I have to say. And I think, so I'm kind of torn a little bit as to the direction to go next, but I think what I'm going to do is put a mid-tone in. So I'm going to mix that up by adding some more of the cadmium yellow deep to the colour that I've got at the moment. Then grab a little bit of the alizarin, a little bit more of that. And let's see what that looks like when we start to put that on. So just keep the surface of the painting nice and moist. Same brush, haven't cleaned it. Okay, so again, it's still not correct, but it's going in the right direction. So I'm still at the moment just picking out the areas which are slightly lighter within those shadow areas that I put down a moment ago. But I need to go lighter again. So what we'll do is I've just scraped off a good amount of the paint off my brush. So I want to go a little more towards the orange. So in order to do that, let's grab some of the cadmium yellow deep and a little touch of the alizarin and work those two together. A little bit more alizarin. Let's mix that in with some of the paint that we've got on the go over here. Let's see what that looks like when we put it down. So that's still not light enough for the lightest parts of the face, but it's starting to go more towards the correct tone for the shadow areas. So I'll just keep the surface of the paper nice and moist. There's actually quite a lot of reflected blue on the skin in the current lighting, so I'll definitely be including that in a moment. Now I've got the paint to be a lighter tone, I can start to move a little bit more towards the left-hand side of the face. And even start to apply some of the same colour to the lips. Now obviously the lips aren't this colour, but when I add some sort of more pinkish and reddish highlights, then that's going to become more appropriate. Basically, the two will sort of bounce off each other in a kind of complementary way, hopefully. So I can use a little bit of this on the left ear. Okay, so we're starting to get somewhere, so that's cool. So now I want to go a little bit lighter again. So I'm actually going to grab the tinting white and put a good amount of that into the colour I've got, but I want to go a little bit more towards the pink. So I'm putting in a little bit of the alizarin. And let's see what that looks like. Where can we put that? Let's put some of that there. Okay, that's good. That's working. So that, some of that can go above that eye, above this right brow. Up here on the left of the forehead as well. And then I can use that as a little bit of reflected light on the neck, on the chin there, round here on the right cheek. And then what I need to do now is just clean my brush a moment. All right, so reasonably clean brush. Let's grab some of the cadmium yellow deep, a little bit of the alizarin. And that's starting to give me an orange, you know, a little bit closer to what I want there, or for the highlights at least, or the low highlights, I would say. Just a little bit of the tinting white. Once again, we'll come in with the water spray just to keep that surface active, and let's see how this looks against this. Oh, that's more like it. That's what I'm after. Right, so now I can start to pick out some of the highlights which are defining Clive's expression here. So he's got those sort of frown, so I'll fill in those frown lines properly, but he's got those light areas which are standing out on his forehead. It's a little bit of the same colour up there, although it's actually a little redder than I've got it, but I'll come back to that in a moment. Now if I look at this area on the right cheek, that's closer in colour and tone to the bit above the brow. And here on the left cheek as well, perhaps a little bit down here on the left side. I can use a little bit of this on the ear too. So there's not really any room with this brush to get into details on the ear, but I can, with the corner of the brush, just outline the ear and hint at the structure of the ear with that little linear bit of paint I applied. So a lot of the highlights on the face, as mentioned earlier, they're quite bluey, but I will come to that in a moment. But for now, I just want to kind of, you know, get some of this orange colour in place. Use some of that around the lips. Okay, now I need to go more pink. So let's get some of the alizarin in there. And before I add any of the tinting white, let's see what that looks like on the nose. That's a bit too red, so let's mix back into there. Well, that's quite good. Okay, so now I'm starting to hone in. So one of the cool things about changing to this cadmium yellow deep is, of course, that I'm going to, you know, stumble across colours that I haven't used before. One of the problems is I'm not used to mixing colours with the cadmium yellow deep, so it's giving me results that I'm not quite expecting, which from my point of view, you know, is really quite good, because obviously it's always good to follow or discover new ways of doing things when we're painting. But obviously it's taken me just a little touch longer to work out my colours here. Now, before I go to the blue, I can switch to the scarf because I've got a colour similar to that on my brush. So I'm grabbing some more of the alizarin and then a good amount of the tinting white, and that's pretty close to the scarf colour. So I'm dragging the. So when you've got a fabric, you want to look at the creases in the fabric, and in general, you want to kind of draw your brush in the direction of those creases. And if there happens to be a little bit of a darker colour, like I've just picked up there on the edge of your brush, as you draw it along, you're going to automatically get a little bit of a hint at those creases in the fabric. So that's quite an efficient way of doing things. Now the scarf kind of curves a little bit as it wraps around the other part of the scarf. Let's get that covered. Don't want to leave any of the first layer of paint, this background colour, I don't want to leave any of that showing, so I'm just making sure I cover that for the moment. So we'll block that in, and then what I'll do in just a second, now I don't plan on showing too much of the clothes, but I do need to just put in a little bit of extra fabric here to show that this scarf is going through under that branch of scarf and then down. And then what I can do next is I could either put in some shadow or some highlights. I'm going to go for highlights, so I'm just grabbing some of the tinting white and keeping the water away from the face for the most part, but just making sure the scarf is nice and damp. What I'll do is I'll just drag that through the damp paint, so it's quite a subtle effect. But it's a nice way to suggest begin to suggest the folds in the fabric. And then having done that, I can grab a lot more of the tinting white on my brush, and then I'm squinting now at the scarf, and I can just begin to put in some slightly stronger highlights here. And then perhaps just a little bit more of the white. It's quite a lot lighter on the left because the light's beaming in from the left. So that's started to suggest the scarf is there. There's a little bit of a white shirt showing here or something like that. I'm going to ignore that.